Ho sentito nei vari interventi raramente citare il tema del conflitto e competizione dalle città, mentre è uscito fuori un po' dall'intervento di oggi pomeriggio e stamattina francamente uno solo, adesso non mi ricordo chi l'ha detto. Ecco, credo che questo sia, rispetto anche al modello di liberalismo-neoliberalismo, forse una matrice importante per comprendere come, diciamo, i diversi insediamenti poi hanno un futuro. Perché se il futuro degli insediamenti è quello di vinca il migliore, probabilmente allora c'è da decidere se questo è possibile e auspicabile. E quindi volevo chiedere meglio su questo tema. Scusate, io poi non sono neanche un urbanista, quindi...
Altri idee? Prego.
Capisci? Una domanda brevissima. Molto interessante lo schema delle due città, Londra e Istanbul. Un piccolo particolare. Istanbul non è in Europa dal punto di vista dell'Unione Europea, ma probabilmente per come sono andate le cose sta diventando proprio invece un baricentro esterno all'Europa. Quindi i due poli in realtà sembrano, e Londra si potrebbe maldisso meno, però anche Londra sembra più, diciamo, guardare non verso l'Europa centrale, ma dall'altra parte. Ma in particolare, quindi in realtà queste due polarità sono come due baricentri che stanno svuotando l'Europa, ma mi interessa in particolare Istanbul, che Europa non è. Grazie.
Altri interventi? Se no
I'll start with the second one and then I move to the conflict issue. You are an institutional fetishist. As urban scholars, I really emphasize the political dimension, but institutions, I'm careful. How should I speak? This way? Okay. Number one, Istanbul is, in urban terms, completely part of Europe. As you probably know, Istanbul has become the supermarket for trafficking for all over Europe. So you have lots of goods coming from Southeast Asia, you have lots of drugs coming from Afghanistan, you have lots of all sorts of goods arriving in Istanbul, and in Istanbul they organize the networks of distributions all over Europe, okay? Formal and informal. So in many ways, Istanbul is one of the leading markets for all Europe, okay? And second, we know that lots of immigration goes through Istanbul as well. So from a pure urban networks perspective, Istanbul is completely in Europe. And historically, it's on the right type of the continent. So when you look at a number of issues, including the strategy of the firms, including the strategy of rich people from Istanbul, Istanbul is more and more, not the government itself, but the Istanbul as a city and the groups within the city are more and more completely integrated in European networks. So I put that as an hypothesis, okay? We have very strong evidence that it is there. London, you're right. Maybe London in 1 year will not be part of the EU. I think it's a very, very, very serious risk. By the way, if London goes, Scotland will go next door. But even if they leave the EU, it remains that nowadays London has accumulated the centrality of London in the European economy is amazing. To give you an idea, when you look at headquarters of firms all over Europe, including world firm having a European headquarter, there's a concentration in London which is 10 times more intense than New York for the rest of the US. London has become the capital, the economic capital of Europe. Lots of large firms have their headquarters in London and then they organize in the rest of Europe. The only city with some headquarters is Paris because we have French large firms. But if you put the French firms out, London, again, even if London is not part of the EU, at the moment we have this concentration and this labour market effect, which I fear is having some consequences from the rest of the world. And thirdly, the problem is that the EU may be less relevant for all those issues. Unfortunately, I should add, and as you know, the EU has a serious crisis, and what do they do really? And with the ridiculous budget they have, they cannot do much anyway. So for all these reasons, I think your point is very well taken, but I still think that in terms of urban dynamics, we should not just forget about that. I mean, we should look at it and then the consequences for the rest of European cities. I can only tell you that for French cities, the impact of London is very, very strong. Some French mayors, when they want to develop a new project, like the Confluent à Lyon or the Ile-de-Nord in Nantes, one part of the key of the success story is whether they attract British capital from London or not. So, I mean, the importance of this factor should not be underestimated. And as a sociologist, I hate that. But this is something we study. So, question mark, we'll see. You're pretty right, but I wanted to emphasize this dimension because those two polarities are structuring a lot of networks around them and attracting lots of networks and then redistributing the effect on the rest of European cities. So I see a bit as a major threat for European cities. On the first question of conflict and competition between cities, I think I mentioned a bit of that in the talk, particularly with the idea that at the EU level, the fact that the EU, there was basically in 1997-98, there was a big fight within the Commission. The regional and urban people, now DG Regio, trying to reinforce the idea of interdependence and redistribution for regional funds and very strong territorial strategies. And the DG4 at that time, now competition, saying no, we should have a single market and no disturbance on the market. We had 2 years of intense fight and DG Regio lost, 9-1 in football terms, I would say. So ever since, you could argue that the strategy of the EU is rather reinforcing the competition between cities. So what we see in Europe is, at the same time, some attempt to create cooperation between various cities and their collective strategies, but they don't do very well, I hear the comments and the points that Sandro and his colleagues are making when you look at Milan and you see all these networks of medium-sized cities around Milan and this network organization. I see that, and from an urban point of view, I see that. But in terms of governance, when I look at the governance of those networks, most experience I'm familiar with, it's rather failure, 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 or semi-failure. So we have very little example of capacity to govern those networks in collective action. So when I see the strength of competition logics versus the cooperation logic, I see more and more competition. And my final argument is because of the change of state policy I have mentioned, I would argue that the states themselves, that's the neo-Marxist argument from Neil Brenner, is organizing more competition between those cities and less support. I once did some research in Newcastle in the north of England with some groups at the OECD, and they are declining badly. And we went to talk to the Minister of Finance in London and telling them, what are you doing? All these Newcastle areas and northeast is really doing badly. So any point? And the top civil servant told us they lost the competition, it will be gentle decline. And I think we see more of these ideas, definitely yes in France, in a number of countries. The idea that you cannot support all the territory, and because of more economic competition, you have to concentrate your support on the strongest actor, which is historically wrong, but I don't know that's what they do at the moment, I'm afraid.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
I think you mentioned both in the books and in the presentation
You want to take
today. Oh, okay.
For people behind.
I can shout. Hi. Thanks for the presentation. I think you've mentioned a fact that European cities are sort of like reacting better than American cities to this like dual process of concentration and dispersal at the same time.
Yep.
And I mean, I think it's a quite a reasonable observation, but I didn't quite catch for what reason do you think this is happening? Like, for instance, in the example of Detroit compared to Torino in Italy, was it an economical scenario that made Torino like possible to react better to the dismissal of the industry as compared to Detroit, or was it a matter of just urban form, difference in the urban form, in the spatial structure of the city? Or, I mean, was it a problem that in Detroit there were no other jobs, no tertiary sector? I mean, there's so many ingredients to like make different cases comparable. Then I was wondering, I was interested in this.
Thank you. Because I do political economy and sociology and science, I never give too much importance to a spatial form, so I may be wrong, okay? So my first answer would be to tell you I doubt the spatial form had any implication for this thing, but I may be wrong. If I look at my type of disciplines, I will tell you, number one, that the classic US urban policy is precisely to organize mobility competition. So the gene of policy in the US is people should be mobile and you have to organize competition. So, and that was from the origins of the American Republic, that was the case. So the point about Detroit, people left and there would be no massive support from the national level to try to do something. It would be just a private sector organizations as they are doing, and a little bit. Second, usually the US spends 20% points of GDP per year less than we do in public expenditure. I mean, this is just massive. We're in a different world. And the US spends now 30% of public expenditure related to GDP. We are about 45% in Europe. A bit more when there's a war, but more or less. So it's not a country organizing around public policy, okay? And not about spending money and investing in territories. It's about regulation of market. People will live, and some days prices will be so bad, some entrepreneurs will take some risk and will rebuild, and they will reinvent Detroit. It might take 50 years, that's not an issue. The second argument is race, because American cities are structured by this tension about race, and this racial issue has been a long-term question in Detroit, and has been accentuated by the crisis. The more this race and poverty issue concentrates, the more the city goes in decline. And in Detroit, as you probably know, there are some pockets of rich and wealthiness and economic development just all around Detroit. So it's not like the entire urban region is declining. So it's just a completely different conception of how do we understand the governance of those cities, what's the role of markets, community, comparing to public authorities. I always tell my students, do not trust Tocqueville. You know, the Americans always tell us the story about Tocqueville coming to the US saying, oh, there's no state, all these communities are doing a fantastic job. You know, my formidable predecessor, Alexis de Tocqueville, just completely missed a few things like slavery, like community organizing, segregation, a few points that have proved quite central in the dynamics of cities over time, I would say.
Yeah. My question is, if you were the Minister of European Urban Affairs, and I would present to you two scenarios,
Yeah.
and you have to choose, you want to compete with the global process of urbanization and development, the one described by Klaus this morning. So you have to go for strong demographic policies and probably neoliberalist economic policies, and see which cities will stand out in this process and how they can compete globally. Or second scenario, you will try to defend some kind of European model, which is, you said London is the safest financial place in the world, but Europe is the safest place in terms of democracy, quality of life, welfare system. We are still that. We are probably the most democratic place in the world. So you take a bet and say, well, I'll defend our model, maybe it's gentle decline compared to the rest of the world, but will we stand a chance in the longer term to be a different place and maybe a model for the rest of the world, which is growing so fast, but also so unjust, probably in many senses?
Prendiamo un altro intervento. Prego.
Thank you for the presentation. Maybe it's a naive question, but very shortly.
The worst ones.
No, I was just wondering, we have seen a lot of trends and processes and so on. We can see quite easily very strong players on the scene, but I was wondering where we can find, in a way, a sort of the role of agency of, let's say, common people, normal people. Is there any place in your picture for the agency of people in a way organized in a traditional way or in an innovative way, but a role, an agency of the common people? Thank you.
Yep. I'll start with a second and I come back to your interesting question. No, your question, of course, is not naive. And in the research I mentioned, the book I mentioned, we've done some precise analysis of individuals. But let me say that in social science, we have seen that a lot of our models of analysis on industrial districts, class, whatever, didn't work very well. So we have had, the trend has been to really develop a lot of anthropology and very local analysis. And that's been very, very good. We've done a lot of very, very interesting research. But there's a very risk with this strategy over time, is that we cannot accumulate results, cannot explain general transformation, and in urban research, there's a lot of localism. So eventually the risk is, we understand nice interactions between individuals, but we don't say anything. And my view is that we have to do that, but this is a historical period where we have a crisis, we have more migration, we have economic globalization, and we have environment crisis coming in. I do not think we should give up thinking in macro terms. And in urban studies, except the Marxists, not many people make the effort to think in those terms. So I think it's also our job at this precise moment to rethink precisely in macro terms. So in a public lecture like that, I exaggerate a little bit this trend, but I do think that we lack some precise theoretical thinking, bringing those elements, especially if you are not a determinist Marxist, then it's not easy to combine those different elements. So I really think that the conceptual effort has to be there. We do that. This does not prevent us from doing very precise research at different levels. But I think we need, at this moment, some level of abstraction and more macro categories to be able to explain some other things. Because when I look at my historical cities, which is Rennes in Brittany, when I see some of the transformation, I can really show a lot of innovative public policy. They are very good people, they do lots of things very well, and all that. But some of the longer term trends are not explained by what is going on in Rennes. Okay? And I see the change of the French state, the EU, I see the demography. When I talked to the mayor of Rennes, she was my student a long time ago, she says, we're doing very well, da 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 da. I said, where are the young people going? The young people are leaving. And some of them, where do they go? They go to London. So that's why I really want to emphasize, I think at this moment, we need to make this effort, but always combined with some serious empirical research. So I agree with you. On your first point, very good question. I think I'll be careful, and I will not damage the European model to start with. Because there's one thing which is going on. Number one, old Marx was right on one thing among others. Capitalism has crisis. Usually it's not the terminal crisis. But everybody, all the people who are serious about finance are all telling you there is no increase of the capacity to regulate finance. Actually, the risks are building once again. So the likelihood of another financial crisis before too long is not impossible. And the second thing I will keep in mind is something else I've not mentioned in details, but we all know, is climate change. And one of the big transformation forces will be, at some point, they will need some forms of coercion, some forms of strong collective choice to be able, because all this agreement where you agree on some percentage and nobody implements them, that will not work for a long time. And actually, I think that precisely European city, because of the resources to deal with governance issues, may be actually among the best places in the world to deal with some of those issues. So the more the environment constraint will be strong, the stronger the environment constraint, the more capacity and the more this capacity for governance might make a big difference over time. So I would be careful on which strategy to adopt. And I would unfortunately disagree with you on a small point. We are Europe, we are a safe place for the world. When you talk to Chinese capitalists or Southeast Asia or African, they don't think so. They think we are a gentle, declining continent, or Brazil, that's their turn. So London as a fiber city, so they invest massively in London, they invest in Singapore, and they invest in the US. But they are not very much interested by Europe, unfortunately.
Ok, io penso che possiamo chiudere qua. Io ringrazio molto Patrick perché ci ha portato un quadro chiaro, macro, molto brillante, molto interessante, e anche lo ringraziamo di non averci portato solo risultati di ricerca ma anche le sue riflessioni sui risultati di ricerca, conoscendo appunto il suo rigore. Mi sembra essere stato molto in linea con quello che abbiamo cercato di fare, che stiamo cercando di fare con Urbanit, cioè di avvicinare la ricerca alle implicazioni che ne possiamo trarre. Quindi grazie moltissimo.
Grazie a lei.